Hey everybody. So hey, welcome to the brand new Unit 3, Lecture 2, right? This is for notes 4 through 7, all right? 4 through 7, all right. Okay, so try to make this quick, right? Get it under 20 minutes, but I know now they were a little bit longer because there's a lot of stuff on here, okay? So pages 4 through 7, all right? So, hey, and do me a favor, please go back and watch the previous lecture and read those notes and study those. I know it was the last night before break was over, but you need to know that material. It's important for us, all right? So get on it, all right? So, now today we get into a couple things. Lobbying, political action committees, and campaign finance, money, all right? So we'll try to make this lobbying one a little bit short. So here's the idea, is that lobbying, all right? What a lobbyist is we've already looked at interest groups in day one, right? These interest groups represent various interests within our country, all right? One of the tactics they will use are lobbyists, and a lobbyist is somebody that they hire to go lobby, meaning, and the word lobby means to try to argue for, right? Members of Congress, members of the executive branch within the bureaucracy, right? At the state level, the federal level. We're generally focused at the federal level, but this is happening at the state level too, all right? In the great state of Nevada, California, all over the country and the other states, right? So, and here's the deal. You hire somebody who has social connections. You hire a lobbyist that maybe is a former member of Congress, maybe a former staff member in Congress, a former member within the executive branch, a former member within the bureaucracy who has connections, who then you hire as an interest group to go lobby your interests to government, all right? Now again, the notes, are they influential? Yes, they're influential usually in very narrow technical issues. The big, broad social issues that the American public knows about, lobbyists tend to be a little bit less effective because members of Congress have to pay attention to what their constituents desire, right? Now, I guess the other thing is interest groups can be are constituents of members of Congress, right? Lots of times interest groups are just simply seen as a negative thing controlling government, which I think you can make the argument for that. But at the same time, interest groups are groups of people that have formed factions, which you're going to read the Federalist 10 tonight, at least part of it we'll go over in class, where they're groups of people arguing to government for things they desire, right? Which is not necessarily a bad thing. There's just can be negative consequences in that at times, all right? However, the First Amendment allows for freedom of speech. This is political speech, lobbying, joining an interest group. And the First Amendment also argues for this idea of the right to peaceably assemble, to join groups that you think are appropriately going to advocate your interests, all right? So you have the Constitution in the way of this as well, or allowing it, right? Okay. So here's the deal. That's an interest group. You hire an individual, right? Now look at this. I'm going to skip down to Roman numeral 5 for a minute. Look at the functions of a lobbyist, influence government, all right? Now the way they influence government is providing information to government. Lobbyists quite often are very technically adept at the interest that your interest group is hiring them for, and they can explain it with their connections to members of Congress and give them information as Congress is writing legislation about the issues you care about. All right? They'll testify at hearings. Now, this is more on the same line of information, right? Now, again, provide information. Members of Congress and lobbyists can talk, right? The whole point is to try to get your lobbyist to get access to a member of Congress to talk, right? To try to convince them, to get their time to convince them to vote a certain way. Now, that's information. They can testify at hearings. These are public. They're on C-SPAN. They're on the news, where Congress will hold hearings on legislation, on policy problems of our country, and quite often lobbyists will testify for their interest groups in front of Congress. We'll look a little bit more into that when we get into Congress in the next unit, all right? And they help write legislation. Now, here's the deal. You can literally, a lobbyist will have all the things that an interest group wants into a piece of legislation, and they will write the legislation or help write the legislation in the drafts and the debates to try to get that language written in a way that benefits the interest group that lobbyist represents. Now what you have to understand is there's never just one lobbyist writing a piece of legislation, right? There's multiple interest groups, right, competing for some legislation. If your interest group is advocating for one thing, there's another interest group maybe advocating for the opposite, right? So there's going to be all these pressures about helping to write legislation. All right. Now, if you look at these other things, back up to Roman numeral 2, cooperative lobbying, grassroots, and netroots. Cooperatives, when interest groups come together to hire lobbyists and work together to try to get legislation written that benefits all of them, right? Dairy farmers, environmentalists, anything and everything, oil companies, anything and everything that is interested, people can come together to try to lobby government, right? To work together with government, all right? Now, the other thing is this grassroots. Grassroots is a really interesting term in politics. Grassroots means politics at a very local level. Lots of times grassroots has this feeling of like, it's not the elites, but it's coming from the masses, all right? Okay, and so lots of times it's organized grassroots at the local level, letter writing campaigns, phone calling, emailings, that kind of thing to get the masses fired up a little bit. Now, what's interesting is you have this one phenomenon called astroturf lobbying, which astroturf is a kind of lobbying that's funded maybe by one very, very wealthy group of people, but they try to make it look like it's grassroots from the masses up because it seems to have more legitimacy if it's a grassroots movement from the masses kind of up, all right? Now, netroots is just what you guys, like, your generation isn't even going to blink about the media anymore, or the social media, all right? Because you've grown up in that, right? Like, I've been around for the transition between the old school politics and now the new school with the social media. And netroots is political activism online, YouTube, Twitter, right? Facebook. I mean, you guys know Instagram. These are things that are now used politically to influence members of government, all right? All right. Now, you might want to know, if you look at regulation of lobbying, Roman numeral 6, why do you need regulation? I want you to think about this. Should we limit it? Doesn't the First Amendment allow it, therefore it shouldn't be limited? Or are there maybe negative consequences? Are some groups having more influence than other groups because of wealth or because of resources, that kind of thing, all right? So look at this. You have the 1946 Federal Regulation Lobbying Act. Basically said, if somebody is a lobbyist and they're going to represent an interest group, they basically had to register as a lobbyist and tell, which is disclosure, what laws you were working on. But it was full of loopholes, all right? And by loopholes, meaning people got around it. It was a feeble attempt to regulate who was lobbying who, all right? And I guess that's the thing, is lots of times people don't want to necessarily limit lobbying. They want to know who's lobbying certain individuals in government so we can at least know those discussions happen and we can watch the results of those discussions, right? Like, is it a right to exist or is it a right that it can be private? I don't know. All right, so, but then we get 1995, another Lobbying Disclosure Act, which limited some of these things, right? And limitations on meals, on vacations, on expense travels, basically said, you can't just go out and wine and dine members of Congress and pay for everything and then say, oh, by the way, hey, we were hoping you could work this way on this piece of legislation. There's some limits to it, right? Things like former members of Congress, former members of the bureaucracy, former members of the executive branch have to wait a full year before they become a lobbyist, all right? So now lobbying, one more thing is there's a famous street in D.C. called K Street, which is where all the powerful law firms, what are lobbyist firms in D.C., all right? K Street is a reference we hear all the time, all right? Now again, remember that a lobbyist is an individual or a small group of individuals hired by an interest group to go make their case to Congress. The reason you hire a lobbyist is because they have connections and expertise and experience, right? So again, the ones with the most expertise, the most connections, the most experience tend to be the most costly. And so think about it. Some groups can afford very, very powerful lobbyists where other groups can't afford lobbyists at all, right? And that's probably where the rub of, is it fair? But again, let's look at these cases for a minute really quickly. They provide information. They provide a way for people to participate by being able to hire a lobbyist, right? And the key thing is a lobbyist is a linking mechanism from the people to government. If people can hire a lobbyist to go talk to government, they're linking the people to the government, all right? Just like the media does, just like political parties do, right? Okay. Now again, here's the other thing. The First Amendment protects it, right? But we just don't know exactly the definition of what is being protected within the First Amendment. So we're going to have arguments about this. And then here's the other thing. As you read in your Federalist 10 tonight, Jimmy Madison is going to make the argument that, look, factions or interest groups, which lobbyists fall under, right, can have negative consequences, right? They can have overpowerful factions that violate the rights of other people, right? And so what he's saying is, his argument about curing the problems of factions, do you get rid of factions completely because there's some negative consequences, or do you keep them because there's so much potential for good and try to limit the negative effects? Because the argument is, if you get rid of factions or interest groups or lobbyists, all the same kind of thing, then you limit free speech. And would you rather live in a society that has no problem of faction but no freedom? Right? So we're arguing for freedom, but trying to find the the right compromise with that. All right. Now again, look at this case against it. The rich and powerful overrepresented. The average poor people are underrepresented. Right. And then another thing is national interest, the good for the whole, is sacrificed for the good of the narrow interest, right? If you have interest groups lobbying for specific groups or lobbyists advocating for interest groups, specific things that may be good for one group, are they necessarily good for the whole? Now, again, maybe if everybody formed an interest groups, we would see reflections of the whole because they're all arguing against each other, right? Okay, now let's kind of move on over to PACs, all right? And this is what I'm going to be simple with PACs today, all right? A PAC is a political action committee, all right? And what a PAC does is it raises money so it can spend to candidates they want to get elected so they can have access to these people, all right, to get elected. Now, here's the thing. PACs can give $5,000 per candidate per election, all right? There's no limit on the number of candidates that a PAC can give to in 1 year. All right, now here's another thing. PACs will raise money, and it's called, if they give money to a candidate directly, it's called hard money. If they give money to a political party, it's called soft money. If they raise their own money and buy their own ads, it's called independent expenditures. Independent expenditures are money raised by PACs, which every interest group will hire a lobbyist, right? Every interest group will create a PAC because that's another tool that allows them to influence government, all right? So PACs are a way to get money to candidates you like or to fund and favor candidates you like. Independent expenditures is something we're going to spend some time with because that's the newest thing, the newest loophole since a couple court cases in the last 10 years. All right? Okay. Now, just a couple numbers here really quickly. I think the numbers here show that by 2004, the number of PAC contributions was 384 million. 10 years later, PAC contributions in the last 2012 election cycle, so actually 8 years later, right, were 1.5 billion. So they're definitely a new source, a way to get money to or spend money on behalf of candidates. That's another thing about independent expenditures. You cannot coordinate with the candidate. You can't go, hey, Bob, you're running for lieutenant governor, you're running for county commissioner, you're running for whatever, president or Congress. What would you like us to run? You have to run them independent, and you can't specifically endorse a candidate and say, vote for so-and-so or vote against so-and-so. But you can run ads that basically make so-and-so look very bad or look very good without saying, vote for, and people will get the idea. And there's no limit on the amount of money of independent expenditures. That's key here, all right? Okay, now, PACs have grown. Now look at these strategies by PACs, all right? This is the key. So campaign contributions. Look at all these strategies under one. They want to get money to candidates they like, because if they get money to candidates they like, they will then be able to get influence, right? Okay, about legislation, decisions made by government. So look at this. They give money to incumbents, right? They give money to people that are likely to win. They give money to people that share the same beliefs as them. They give money to people that will give them access, right? They also give them to certain people, right? They give them to House Majority Leader, key chairmen of certain congressional committees and subcommittees, certain leadership positions within Congress, those people that have a disproportionate or a lot of power within Congress itself, all right? Key figures, all right? Voter education projects. You should be getting some of these in the mail, all right now, about things that are just simply saying, vote for so-and-so, or these guys are great, or these are the issues you should think about, right? Now, independent expenditures we went over, all right? Now, bundling. Look up bundling, because bundling is an interesting thing, and I'll answer it. We'll talk about it at the beginning of class. All right, now listen. 527 groups, all right? I'm going to simplify this for a minute. Super PACs, 527s, 501cs. These are all kind of funky elements to campaign finance law that exists. And generally what we care about right now is this. Their big thing is they can give money to candidates, hard money to parties, soft money, and spend independent expenditures. We had a Supreme Court case in 2004, Citizens United, which basically said you cannot limit their independent expenditures, all right, which opened up this whole gateway of money, or floodgate of money, sorry. And so now with these 527s, 501cs, super PACs, all right, what they'll do is they'll run issue advocacy ads. They'll say, these are the issues that are important, and these are candidates that believe the same thing we believe. They can spend their own money. They can spend hundreds of millions of dollars. Look at this. $152 million were spent just by independent expenditures in the 2012 cycle. All right? individual groups like MoveOn.org, Crossroads GPS, Americans for Prosperity, these are all groups that will be formed, 527s, 501cs, etc. They will raise money specifically to spend it on independent expenditures, which means there's no limits on what they can spend. There are some limits on the messages they say, but no limits on how much they spend. And you're seeing a rise, like we saw in the 70s, we saw this huge growth in PACs. Now you're seeing this huge growth in independent expenditures because it's loopholes in existing law to get money to certain people, all right? I know that's hard to wrap your head around, but we're going to get to it later a little more, all right? So try to study this a little bit. Now, who has PACs, all right? So I guess that links it all back. PACs spend independent expenditures. PACs form 501cs, 527s, super PACs, which is purely raising independent expenditures, all right? All right. Now, who has PACs? Big business has PACs. Ideological groups like Crossroads for America, right? These like Republican Democratic groups, all right? Labor unions, right? Doctors, lawyers, insurance companies, etc. They all have them. Corporations are the biggest source of PACs, all right? Now, if we move over really quickly to page 6, here's the deal. It's the same argument. One, does the First Amendment allow government to limit what PACs can spend because of freedom of speech and the right to associate, all right? And again, are the wealthy overrepresented by PACs and the less wealthy underrepresented? And then, therefore, do you have a government which will only benefit the wealthy and not the masses, right? Like, that's kind of the big argument, all right? So look at the other dangers and ethical concerns, all right? Those are important, all right? But let's flip over to what I think is kind of the harder part today, all right? Is this campaign finance. So I'm going to do a couple things. You have two pieces of legislation, FICA, and you need to know the details of FICA, all right? And you have Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, also known as BICA or McCain-Feingold, all right? Now another thing, you also have kind of three types of money: hard money, soft money, and independent expenditures. Hard money is money directly given to a candidate, all right? Now, how much does FICA say you can give in hard money to a candidate? How much does McCain-Feingold say? All right? Soft money is money to a party, right? From an individual or organization to a party, D's or R's or whatever party. What does McCain-Feingold say you can give in soft money? What did FICA say about soft money? All right, now independent expenditures, there's never really been a limit on independent expenditures so much, all right? And that's the new loophole because there's been limits on soft money and hard money lately, all right? But check out FICA. 1974 in the wake of, say, Watergate and all that kind of stuff, right? All right. Disclosure, subsidies, limitations. Disclosure is who's giving money, who's receiving it. Subsidies is when the government funds part of a campaign. Limitations are literally, can you limit how much people give? Can you limit how much people spend? All right. So what FICA did, one, and this is gigantic and kids tend to forget it, is FICA created the Federal Elections Commission, an independent executive organization which is going to monitor and watch campaigns. Federal Elections Commission was created by FICA, and what the Federal Elections Commission does is if you're a candidate running for office, you have to submit paperwork to them every quarter, how much money you raised, who gave it to you, and how much money you spent and how you spent it, all right? We're not limiting what they're spending or being donated, but what they are limiting or they want to know is disclosure, who's getting the money. Because what you want to know is, are politicians being purchased by small groups with tons of money? Or are they represented the people, right? I mean, or they represented smaller groups, right? That's a constant back and forth. And again, don't forget about the First Amendment, all right? Okay. Hey, and bring your books to class, please. We're going to annotate the First Amendment next class. All right. Now, here's the deal. All right. I'm going to let you figure out some of those questions I asked. Now, we have a court case, Buckley v. Vallejo. Somebody didn't like FICA, and so they sued. They used litigation, a tactic used by interest groups to get a decision that they would like, right? Okay. Now, what Buckley v. Vallejo said, they upheld limits on contributions, meaning how much you can give to a candidate. But they got rid of any limits that FICA created on overall spending. All right, they said the First Amendment says spending is a form of speech. Spending is a form of expression. All right, now look at this. BICA comes along, or I'm sorry, Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act comes along and bans soft money donations to national parties. Soft money, though, right, you can give it to state parties with some limits on it. Find those limits for me and find out what it did to hard money, all right? Now, what can PACs give per candidate per election. Hard money and soft money. Now we know there's no limits on their independent expenditures, all right? So now in C here, in Roman numeral 2 on page 7, 2C, it says unions and corporations are banned from giving money to soft money to parties. Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission in 2004 got rid of that. That is dead. Unions and corporations can give soft money following the rules above. All right? They can also spend money on independent expenditures, the newest loophole. All right? Okay. Now, as you get into this analysis, all right, money has basically, there's more money in campaigns now than in the past, which according to, right, just simply the rising cost, right, inflation is going to create that. But here's the big key. I think the big key here is that independent expenditures are the new loophole. And that's what we've seen recently. You'll see in these ads, you'll see in the news, you'll see in class that when we look at all this money, outside groups spend a lot of money on behalf of candidates, but don't link themselves to those candidates. So like, Bob is great, Ted is terrible, right? And they spend all this money advocating for those two issues, but don't give money directly to the candidates because of limits on what you can give to a candidate. All right? All right. Now, bundling. Go check it out, all right? Now, one last thing is these subsidies, all right? There are no subsidies for congressional elections, House and Senate races. There are subsidies for presidential races. And what that means is there's a matching funds program. So if a presidential candidate raises $60 million, the government will match that $60 million for a total of $120 million. If you take matching funds as a presidential candidate, you can only spend that $120 million. Now, only, I know that's a ton of money, but think about it. Romney and Barack Obama spent almost $2 billion total, $1 billion each in the last election. So that is comparatively not a lot of money, right? So, but the deal is that if you take matching funds, they can limit how much you spend. But if you choose not to take matching funds, then they can't limit what you spend. All right? Now listen, we're going to do some activities in class to strengthen this, okay? So study this stuff, listen to this lecture, and then I will see you in class. All right.